Alright, hello YouTube. This is going to be a video on regulation of massive corporations, on regulating capitalism and the threat it poses to us all, free speech and human rights, and why free speech is a human. And I'm going to start this out not too differently from the way I started out the last video, and it's also going to be, or not, it's going to be a bit different because I'm not going to talk about that issue because that's not really what this video is going to be about. And it's not really going to be about a lot. I didn't even write down any list of things I wanted to talk about. So this is just going to be a quick analysis of some of the last stuff in my last video, or at least a few of the issues. And it's going to be just a video largely about one issue. I'm not talking about more than that. It's probably not going to be a long video, and that's what this is. And it's just going to be like that. It's not going to be about that specific topic. But anyways, it was about deregulation because John Stossel made a video about see, this is why I try to work off at least a list of ideals, because I'm kind of all blurry and kind of fucked up here, but I'm not really knowing what I'm going to say because I didn't write down a list of topics, because I usually write down a word that reminds me of what to talk about or something. But John Stossel talked about regulation or overregulation of companies, corporations, what he thinks is overregulation. And one of the things I said on that, of course, was, some cases from what I have read and what I understand, during genital mutilation or circumcision of children, in some cases during circumcision of children, they don't even Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, I love it when I do Scooby-Doo.
Anyways, back to the point. They don't desensitize the area. They're not using pain relief in some cases during circumcision. At least that's what I've learned over the years. More recently, and I'm not going to talk about that, but the point is that was just one of many medical issues that can happen when you don't regulate the medical establishment. But it's also the same thing for any other companies and corporations, and you have to remember. But of course, that wasn't what John Stossel was talking about. I just brought that up as an example of what happens if you don't properly regulate the government. And I'm sorry if this video sucks so far, but I'm going to try to get to the point. But that's also, deregulation is also what led to things like global warming and the environmental disaster we're under. And it is what has led to various abuses of animal rights and human rights. It's what has led to millions of fucking people being in prison, millions of people being in prison. And that has devastated, as you know, minorities in the Black community. It's devastated them. And that's largely due to a for-profit prison system that's ran by corporations. And I talked about that before. I could go into detail, but I want to get to the point. And that is why we are in so many wars. That is why Wall Street was allowed to fuck the economy the way they did. And then we had to go in and bail them out. We had to go in and bail Wall Street out. And we also had to bail out the automotive industry. And they also are involved in the shipping of jobs overseas in some cases. So they fell and we bailed them out. When you get in debt, when you go into debt and you lose your house, no one bails you out, but you have to them. So you had to bail these people out. And anyways, in short, deregulation doesn't always work, and competition doesn't always work, because you might think that it does, and in some cases with good reason. And that's not to say there isn't anything in the society or in the whatever that needs to be deregulated. I'm not saying nothing needs to be deregulated, but ultimately I think that over deregulation creates more problems. And I think that we have seen that, and it has been proven. And these companies, some of them get controlling, they become more power hungry, they start to push agendas. And it's easier than ever for them to merge together, for them to create super monopolies, and for them to totally control content. And you're seeing that right now with the internet. You're seeing that on this website in some ways. They're rolling out new regulations, and that could be a big deal. It could not be. I don't know. We have to see. And that's something that I'm worried about, because I do a lot of activism work and activist work, and I talk about all kinds of issues. I talk about intactivism. I talk about anti-circumcision. I talk about animal rights. I talk about other human rights. I talk about anti-capitalism as well as anti-communism. I talk about LGBTQ rights and other human rights. I talk about free speech, free expression. I talk about helping the environment. These are things I care a lot about. I'm anti-war, things like that. And that's something I do, and it's also a way for me to manage my sanity. And that's why I'm just going to assume the best about the YouTube situation, because I need that right now for my sanity, honestly. But the point is, um, I think that this is what happens when you have a deregulation of corporations. You have that right now with the media. And no one, when these companies get too big and they hold the country hostage in some cases, and they get involved in government and they start to, you the government, you get these big donors, the government donors that don to, or they give money to the Republican or Democratic Party, and they pretty much, they do that really in for favors. They want the government to do something for them. They're not just giving them money for no reason. And when they get like, I forget how many, but it's like a handful of companies control most of the media. So you have like a handful of companies that control the media you get to see. And you have three big news networks that tell you what to think, and that's Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. And, that's a big problem. You see the same thing with society and with the culture, and then they talk about it being democracy and we're supposed to be democratic. Well, I'm sorry, but how can you be democratic when you can't even have free speech? Because that is the most basic of human rights. And again, we have to rely on internet content providers and people on the internet to also help give us some idea of what's going on, and to get more than one version of an event and one side of a story. Or if not, we're having to go to news networks that are controlled by three companies that are putting profit first and don't care about the human consumer. They care about the product. And how can you properly elect or vote for someone that you're voting for when that's your only information? Because you're voting, but you don't even know who you're voting for, and you're having to vote for one of two parties, and you don't even know what they believe, really know what they believe. And it's just a big fucking mess. And then you're supposed to vote for them, and there are only two political parties, so you get two choices, because you have two political parties that choose two people, and then you don't even know what they believe, and you can't even see the real content and know what's going on in society. And like I said, it's just a big fucking mess. And I got all fucked up there. I'm sorry. And this video is gonna suck. I know it would. Damn. But also, by the way, these are the same big companies, the same for-profit companies that put profit before human interest. These same big companies, big corporations, they also control not only what you get to see, hear, say, and do, but they're controlling the food and even the air you breathe. And there's no way of knowing what damage you're doing to the country, to the environment, or to your body, or to you, to your mind, or to you, or to your family, your children, to the people in this country, to the people of the world. We don't know what damage they're really doing. But this is a big problem. We do need to deregulate some things, but a lot of shit, like the prison industry, in some cases the medical industry. I've talked about circumcision. I'm against that. I think if you're not going to outlaw that outright, then there should at least be some kind of regulation of that to make sure they're at least using medication, for fuck's sake. But there's so many things that we need to do. And you can deregulate some things. I think you should have more homeschooling. I'm not against that. More choice of where school your kids go to, maybe. I don't know all there is to know about that, but there's things you can deregulate. I think that if someone, something like communal living, people kind of living off grid, I think we need to deregulate that, deregulate storing food and stuff like that. People deciding to return more to nature. If you want to deregulate stuff like that, then that is fine. But certainly when you're talking about the prison system, the medical industry, like I talked about, the big prison system, the insurance companies, the education system as it is now in some ways it could be deregulated. But these big colleges that are putting all this debt on these kids to get an education they need, the military, when you're talking about deregulating that, you're talking about increasing all the problems we have that has gotten us to this point of an economic recession and got us in all these wars. And libertarians are supposed to be against wars, but we have a corporate funded military because, again, you don't want to regulate the corporations, and then they go into these wars. And they're doing that for corporate interests in many cases. So we have to regulate that. And, it's that simple. And we do need to regulate a lot of different things. And again, the for-profit prison industry, we need to regulate that, and that really needs to be nationalized or made public so that the people can control the prison system and not big corporations and companies that just want to put more people in prison so they have excuses to build more prisons to make more money, and that's how that works. Because that's a disaster, and you can look at the massive number of homeless people and everything else we have in this country now. We have got to regulate and start regulating this. And I was surprised by Alex Jones. He'll surprise you ever so often, but he came out is saying, essentially, from what I understood him to be saying, or looked at what he was saying, is saying that internet should be considered a human right, in part because the same as food and water. Why? Because in order to speak up for people's right to food, their right to water, their right to not be tortured, against torture, whether it be political torture, political prisoners, or something of that nature, or torture of children, as I just talked about earlier in the video, and in my last video, where you have children being mutilated, circumcised, whatever, and not using medication. I would consider that torture. And that, from my understanding, that does happen in some cases. Someone even said that was a norm. I don't believe that, but it does happen. So the point is, in order to speak up against that, in order to speak up for animal rights and against torture of animals and more brutal ways of killing animals, and I'm not against, honestly, over a long period of time, getting rid of meat consumption altogether. I don't think really you should be killing animals. I think we should be developing beyond that point. But again, maybe that's a pipe dream. But the point is, I do think that in order to do that, you have to have the internet. And in third world countries, they don't have the internet. And in communist dictatorships, in despotic hellholes, you don't have the fucking internet. And they do that in part because many of these countries, they don't believe in free speech, and they don't want you to have free speech either. So they don't let you have the internet because that would enable you to have free speech. Because now, so if you have the internet, because then now you can go and you can talk to someone else in your country and talk to your countrymen and even talk to people outside of your country about various issues and things that you need to talk to them about, and about your human rights issues and the state of human rights in your country. And could you imagine being a gay person in China or Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the world and having the ability or having the right to talk about your issues, being a female in Saudi Arabia, being a female in Afghanistan, and being able to talk about your issues and how you're being treated, and to be anyone anywhere in the world and talk to someone else in that country or even in another country, and that enables them to talk about their problems, and talking about their problems empowers them. And your voice is really your main human right, probably almost as much, if not more than anything else. And that's the one way you get shit done. Because if you can't have the voice to think a thought and then communicate that thought to someone to speak, something that all animals do in some way to alert people to danger and all kinds of things, if you can't have that, or if you can't even have that right, then you don't have any right. And that's a democracy. That's our society and our culture. That's what you're empowering and defending. And you're doing that in a society that is, at the same time, you're allowing that in a society that is also promoting this deregulation of these companies that want to take that right from people. At the same time, you're bombing countries in Iraq and Afghanistan, and one of the reasons you used to bomb them was spreading democracy. And then they bomb these countries, and then you're taking it away from your citizens. And I've not seen very much democracy anywhere in the world. I just see more bombings and more shit blowing up wherever we seem to invade. So, again, these are all important issues of the day that we need to talk about as a country, and we need to be able to have a discussion. And whenever anyone starts telling you that you can't question something, you can't question authority, that group of people, they should be suspect. I don't care who they are. And here you have these rich corporations that the libertarians defend, and this is why I'm not a libertarian, defending that. And again, the libertarians once again put profit before human beings, and in this case before real liberty and before free speech. And if you look at what got the libertarians on the map, it was free speech. Fuck, I mean that was what got Ron Paul so popular when he ran as a Republican in that debate, and he got all those supporters, and he became so popular and everything. But it's very important. I guess that's why Alex Jones supports this, or freedom for the internet being a human right, because he knows, if nothing else, you need that, because look what happened to him. He got kicked off. He doesn't like that happening to him, and he's a smart man, and I agree with him about that. I might not like him about a lot of shit, but I agree with him about that. So free speech and freedom of expression is a human right, and the internet should be a human right. And there should be some kind of regulation, some kind of limitations put into place by the government to prevent this type of shit from happening. But, I don't know. That's just about it, But yeah, I forget I was gonna say something else, but that's about it. But yeah, but most of all, I support liberty, fraternity, equality, and equality. And that's what we have to support and believe in, and that's what I believe in. And yeah, I just want people to be able to discuss things. That everyone should be able to discuss things and discuss issues. And again, when you see people telling you you can't question authority, when you can't question everything, and you can't ask questions, and they don't want to answer questions, that is when you should hold them suspect, and you should become suspicious, because something is going on, and there is a much larger than normal conspiracy, or if you don't like that word, let's say partnership, something happening above your heads that you don't know about, and they're going to screw you. And we need to understand that and know that. But that's all. And as always, not to talk about this in every single fucking video, because I admit I have a bit of a weird obsession with it, and it's getting old. But still, if you will research circumcision and the negative effects it can have, and I'd rather you not do that to your child, don't circumcise your child. And that's all. P666.